Okay. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. This will be the first talk for our Beyond Divestment Summit. And we have wonderful speakers, both Massie and Bill McKibben, to come here first. I'm so glad you are here. I'd like to give you guys a little introduction. Bob Massie is the president and CEO of the New Economics Institute. The New Economics Institute also was part of making this event today happen and possible. And Bob Massie got his bachelor's degree from Princeton University and his master's from Yale Divinity School, and he finished his doctorate in Harvard Business School. And later he taught at the Harvard Divinity School and also served as the director for the project on business values and economics. And in '98, Mr. Massie wrote a book, Losing Bonds, United States and South Africa in the apartheid years. And this book won the Lionel Gilbert Prize for the best book on international relations in the world. And during his career, Bob Massie has served and led and founded many wonderful groundbreaking sustainability organizations. Not to mention that he co-founded the Global Reporting Initiative, and he was the president for CERES, which is the largest coalition of investors and environmental groups. And he also initiated the investor network on climate risk, which currently has over 100 members and combined assets of over $100 billion. So we are really thrilled to have you here today, Bob. Thank you so much for coming.
I was going to ask Bill to go first because I was going to key off the things that he said. So, Bill, perhaps you want to... Yes. He needs no introduction, Bill McKibben?
Nat will give us
I'll give a little introduction. I'll keep it short.
All right.
Bill McKibben is a staff member and frequent speaker here at Middlebury. His book, The End of Nature, was one of the first books to warn the general public about climate change. He's also helped to co-found 350.org, which is an international grassroots organization that promotes climate change awareness. In that capacity, he's been arrested for civil disobedience on multiple occasions. And lately, he's been working on the fossil fuel divestment campaign. So please welcome Bill McKibben.
Microphone? You want us using the microphone?
Do you want to use the lectern, Bill?
No, you want us to stand up.
Oh, boy.
All right. Is that going to be cool for you?
No.
All right. Well, I'm not going to talk for long because I mean, y'all can hear me most of the time, much too much of the time, and I'm eager to hear Bob, who's one of my favorite people in the world. Someone from whom I've learned more than just about anybody, and who's actually exactly the right person to have on this campus at this moment thinking about these things. He was, in his student days and shortly thereafter, one of the handful of real movers and shakers who made the apartheid divestment campaign happen in this country. He wrote the history of it, but he lived the history of much of it too. And when I started thinking about how we're going to try to do this around fossil fuel, the very first person I called to sort of talk about it was Bob, and he's been absolutely instrumental in helping us understand it. And I have no doubt that we're talking today about being beyond divestment. I have no doubt that it's going to be a struggle to get beyond divestment some places. We're very hopeful that at Middlebury, the trustees will do the right thing and sooner rather than later. But if they don't, I have no doubt that if we need to have a, mock refugee camp on Battelle Beach next fall and sleep there for night after night to remind people what it's already, I have no doubt that Bob will show up, sleeping bag in hand, and we will do what needs doing to make the case. He is a hero in many, many ways, including now in this really important work about trying to imagine what possible economic futures look like. So for me, this is great fun just intellectually now to get to stop talking for a minute about the sort of pressing campaigns of the moment, divestment things, and talk a little bit about this. My intellectual work in recent years, as opposed to my kind of work as an activist, has largely been about what the transition toward different economies might look like. I wrote a book called Deep Economy, and another book, the second half of the book, Earth, is largely taken up with these questions. And they're questions that we think about a lot here in Vermont because we're a little further along, at least the beginning of this transition, than most places in the country. I don't think that they are abstract questions, i.e. I don't think that this is one of these cases where ideology is what rules or where we try and figure out what the perfect end state looks like before we get. I think these are cases where very concrete realities move us, force us to start moving in new directions, and then as we go along, we figure out where we're going to end up. For me, the most important of those, there's a number of concrete realities that one could start from, including the truly gross inequalities in our society, in our world that Occupy highlighted successfully last year. Or the kind of the sort of associated democratic kind of breakdowns in our governments here and elsewhere, exemplified by the kind of strange and fitful response to the fiscal crisis in many countries and so on and so forth. For me, the most important of these concrete realities that we have to deal with is the just staring us in the face reality of what's happening ecologically around the planet. Last summer, the Arctic melted. The latest cryosat data shows that there's about 20% of the ice in the Arctic that there was 40 years ago. We've taken one of the largest physical features on Earth and we've broken it. That's what our economic system has produced, not in some abstract or theoretical terms or whatever, but just in very real terms. That's what it's done. It's melted the Arctic. It's turned the oceans so far 30% more acidic than they were 40 years ago. And it's made sure that the atmosphere is about 5% wetter on average, since warm air holds more water vapor than cold, hence the flood and drought cycles that we now see amplified around the world. We're still at the very beginning of that kind of disruption. So far, we've raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree, but the scientists who told us that that would happen tell us that it'll be 5 or 6 degrees soon unless we get off coal and gas and oil, at which point it's very difficult to imagine anything resembling our civilizations enduring. So the question's very pressing. I mean, we have to get off coal and gas and oil, and we have to do it fast. And what does the world look like on the other side of that? For me, that's been the kind of way into these questions. And though you could talk about it in, you could sort of think of that as a kind of series of scientific or engineering questions, they're also, and most profoundly, economic questions, because coal and gas and oil, more than anything else, are at the root of our economy. And they determine how that economy works and how we think about it. I was saying to Bob at lunch that I always strive to remind myself, whenever I find myself starting to become abstractly ideological, that Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations 30 years after James Watt invented the steam engine and not the other way around, i.e. it was our ability to harness fossil fuel that was the game changer, and much else, including ideologies of various kinds, flowed from that event. And so we have no choice but to try and speculate and work on what happens to our economies if we make successfully the transition that science requires us to make off those fuel sources. I think what happens, and this has been the burden of my work, and I think it's sort of the direction that much of the kind of new economic thinking is now heading in, I think what happens is you inevitably have a world that's somewhat more localized than the one we currently inhabit. And I think that has a lot to do with the physical properties of the fuel sources that come next. If you think about fossil fuel, it's very dense and energy rich. It's concentrated in a few places. It's easy to transport around. It led fairly easily to the kind of centralized energy regimes and economies that we see at the moment. Renewable energy is different. It's equally, if not more, abundant, but it's spread out. It's very diffuse. And it leads in a very different direction. You know, I think that the image to think about when we think about the new economy, one way for those of us who are older to kind of visualize this is when we were growing up, when you got information, okay, it came from 3 TV channels. And they came very centralized and they were beamed out to us, and that's what we got. Now we live in a world with a huge multiplicity of information, all of us able to put in and take out at all times. The internet is a very different architecture. The same thing's beginning to happen to our food system. We're used to the idea that we have the sort of equivalent of NBC and CBS and ABC, but we call them, you know, Archer Daniels Midland and Cargill and, you know, a few other kind of giant monoculture, dominant agribusiness concerns here and around the world. Well, that's beginning to be upended by the rise of the local food movement. The farmers market's a kind of internet for calories. People put in and take out both. And that's beginning to acquire, it's not moving at internet speed, but it's acquiring some momentum. For the first time in 150 years, for the last 5 years, the number of farms in this country has been growing, not shrinking, which is a very powerful indicator of system shift, I think. And with energy, the same thing, I think, is starting to happen. A world where instead of a few centralized power plants, we rely on a huge abundance of windmills and solar panels on people's roofs, and where we shared the electrons that came from the sunlight falling on our shingles is a very different world. And it too is beginning, still at the beginning, of acquiring some momentum. But Ripton town meeting, on Monday night we voted to make sure that there would be, cover the roof of the school with solar panels. So, you know, as Ripton goes, so goes the nation. I think. But here's the thing, and this gets back to these sort of questions of divestment and whatever else. None of this happens without a fight, okay? Because the old order of doing things makes an astonishing amount of money for a small number of people who are more than happy to do everything they can to make sure that it keeps happening. So, you know, the big power players have done everything they can to make sure that the internet doesn't become the sort of democratic force that it could be, but was controlled by, you know, the same communications companies. And we see the same kind of pushback on food. And on energy, it's even more intense because this is the richest industry on earth. And they're doing everything they can to make sure that they keep that status for a long time. They have the great privilege, and it's a purely economic just gift, that alone among industries they're allowed to put their waste out for free. They're the only ones who get to do that. And that's why they're so rich, and it's why we have to fight them so hard. Final thing I'd say, and I hope Bob will get into this, there are, you know, the sort of fourth big commodity after information and food and energy that I think is really important here is capital. And we've let it be centralized in exactly the same ways. Something like 70% of the wealth of America is tied up in 5 or 6 big money center banks at the moment. That's who control. I mean, it's almost, I mean, it's crazy. And there's no reason for that. It would make far more sense. I mean, well, here's how I'll wrap up. The most important phrase that came out of the last 5 or 6 years as we watched the financial crisis and things, the most important phrase was probably too big to fail. Okay? And we took that to mean, the sort of meaning in Congress was, okay, then we have to bail you out. We can't, you're too big to fail. But really, if you think about it, what it means, anything that's too big to fail is too big and needs to be made smaller quickly so that its failure doesn't destroy things. We need to build down the scale and spread out our food system, our energy system, our capital systems, just the same way that we've begun to with our information systems. And if we do, not only will we have, I think, and this is the good news part of all of this, a more survivable economy that can deal with some of the hard stuff that's coming at us, and not only will we have one that's, doing less damage, pouring less carbon into the atmosphere, we'll also have one that's far more democratic than the one we have at the moment. We can talk more, if we want, about how that'll play out. One big part of deep economy, and that was just an argument that actually this would make us, this kind of world would make us considerably happier than the one we're in at the moment. Just statistically, we haven't done that well in terms of increasing human satisfaction as standards of living and throughput and things have risen. But for the moment, I think it's enough to say that this is both a necessity and an opportunity. And one of the most important things about the divestment campaign is that it helps drive us in those directions. It's a wedge for making us understand how we can get off a system that quite literally is destroying the planet around us. 50 years from now, no one's going to care about the things that at the moment seem to be obsessing us, the fiscal cliff or the sequester or anything else. They'll look back at our time on Earth and ask, so the Arctic melted, and then what did you do? And that's really, at some level, I think, the question that we're addressing with all this work. And there's nobody better to address it than Bob, and nobody whose work means more to me than his. So very grateful to have him at Middlebury.
Thank you, Bill. That's a pretty big build-up. I could talk for quite a long time, which I won't because I want to get to our questions. I could talk for a few hours. We could talk for a few days. I think the reality is that for many of you, we're going to be talking about this for the rest of your lives. And I think that that's one of the core points I want to make, is that we are moving into a stage where much of what we've learned, much of what we are being told, much of what we are being taught needs to evolve rapidly to connect with the world as it is being presented to us, to reality as it's being presented to us. So much of what happens, I think, once you plunge into this world about thinking about the new economy and the old economy, for me, given that I have both a background in divinity school and background in business, drawing from the Bible, there's a phrase that that people have ears but they do not hear, and they have eyes but they do not see. And I think in so many parts of our world right now, among our leaders and our press, among our faculty, hardworking as they may be, there is this phenomenon. And so part of what we're trying to do in the New Economics Institute, and in partnership with Bill, who has been one of the people I've most admired for my career, and was a great blessing for me when we became friends and realized that we could start working closely together. But making these things that have been invisible visible, and bringing them up for conversation so that they can actually be changed. That question of visibility is at the heart, and you want to help people be able to see things in such a way that they can never unsee them. They're having become aware of them, it animates their beliefs, and then it animates their actions. And then in turn, as they take actions, they are, again, their awareness is changed and deepened, and their beliefs are changed. And that's a process of social transformation. Now, a lot of people in this room have already been doing hard work on this. I'm just going to skim over a few things. One of the things, and I'm still looking for exactly the right metaphor, of course, the easiest metaphor to pick is that we are all very busy, and we are like the people on the Titanic who are all busy enjoying our lives or doing our work or making sure that everything runs properly. The problem is that there isn't a single iceberg that we are sailing towards now. There are at least five fundamental structural icebergs that are interrelated, and we're going to talk about how they're interrelated, that present a serious and urgent danger for us to address. And I'm really just going to mention them. We can come back and discuss them. Obviously, the one that has gotten our attention thanks to your work and Bill's incredible work and the planet's relentless desire to remind us is our broken climate and the rapidly deteriorating situation that we are facing. But there are others. We have systems now and theories of economics and finance that absolutely do not describe and address the core problems that we face as human beings. Now imagine that. We've developed theories that are completely disconnected from what we are actually experiencing. And that's a problem because we are continuing to make decisions on the basis of those theories. Now you're very lucky that my good friend and board member John Fullerton is here today, and a man with deep experience in the financial world is going to talk to you about this. John has done some really extraordinary thinking and speaking about this question, but think about what a serious problem is when economics departments or financial theory is no longer aligned with the economy and or the planet. We have, as an example of this machine that we call the economy spinning forward and chewing up large amounts of resources in a pattern of unlimited exponential growth that more and more people are realizing simply can't be sustained. One of the most successful financial wizards on Wall Street is a man named Jeremy Grantham. Jeremy Grantham, just to give you an illustration of how compounding interest doesn't really work, he said, imagine, he uses this analogy, he said, imagine that the Egyptians created something that was a cubic meter in size about 1,000 years BC. And imagine that thing that they created grew at a 4.5% compound growth rate. Well, by now, that block would be equivalent to the volume of the solar system. So compound growth rates have a way of taking off and then sort of destroying things once they get past a certain level. And we'll come back and talk about this, but there are many traditional economists and certainly many new economists who are saying, what can we do about this problem? On the one hand, we talk about the need for growth as a way of bringing people out of injustice and poverty, and yet at the same time we're hitting not just peak oil, but peak everything. And are we measuring the wrong thing? So we have climate, we have growth, we have broken finance and economics, we have fundamental inequality. We put out a video that went viral yesterday showing exactly how unequal the United States is. And it's absolutely appalling if you get the chance to take a look at it. It starts off showing what Americans think inequality is in the United States, and then what they'd like it to be, and then what it really is. And the transformation between what people think it is, which is, people at the bottom don't have much and people at the top have a lot more, is nothing compared to how tiny the resources available and the assets and the income available to the poorest among us have relative to the unbelievably vast sums available to folks at the top. The 6 people who've inherited the wealth of the Walton family, the 5 people, and the daughter-in-law, I think, I'm sure they're very nice people. Their combined net worth is equal to the bottom 100 million Americans. And that's just one indicator of how problems are adding up. Now, in a sane society, you would have a democracy that would start to address these questions and say, oh my gosh, there's huge problems that were coming down the pike. What can we do? what adjustments can we make? Maybe we stop subsidizing oil companies. Maybe we alter our tax policy. Maybe we make it possible for things to be rebalanced in some way. But we have a fundamentally broken democracy. So I could go into those, and if you like, when we have some discussion, we can go back and both Bill and I, I'm sure, will be living web pages, and you can click on anything and we can go on the details of this. But that's what we're up against. And the thing that is important about climate and about divestment is that climate is kind of the example in which we start to see all of these things made visible. If we measured things correctly, if we had a correct economic and financial system that internalized the cost of carbon, maybe we wouldn't be in such deep problem. If we had a democracy which listened not only to the affluent and the powerful and the corporate community, but listened to the people who are being affected, increasingly being known as the frontline communities, we might have a different thing. But each piece is broken. If we weren't as addicted to growth, we might not be, drill at all costs. So climate, in all its urgency, where we have to act, is also a continuous reminder that these other elements are a part of the problem, and we have to think about them as well. Now, there are some things that are changing, and that's kind of where I want to talk about as we think about the relationship between divestment and the new economics, new economy. And I'm happy to go into greater detail about divestment if you like. Asi mentioned I spent a lot of time, both personally and academically, studying the South African divestment movement, what worked, what didn't work. There's a lot of interesting parallels about tactics and strategies. We can talk about that. But I wanted just to give you a hint of the things that are changing, because I want you, in fact, I need you, we need you, to become aware of this so that you can become part of this movement and that you can become part of the changes that we desperately need. Now, the new economy goes under many different names. People are trying to find the right expression of what we're looking for, and some of you know Gus Speth, who teaches at the University of Vermont Law School, a great leader in, of course, many years, member of the New Economics Board. He made a list of the different names that have popped up. I'm going to read you just some of them. So there's new economy, solidarity economy, sharing economy, resilient economy, sustaining economy, restorative economy, regenerative economy, collaborative economy. Now, they each kind of put emphasis on a somewhat different thing, but we all kind of sense, I think, what they're talking about. It's an economy that is an instrument to serve the needs of the people on the planet, rather than a machine that gets set up and takes people in, crunches them around, and spits them out without any judgment about whether it's achieving what we want as human beings. And people want that to change. Now, it's interesting because in our internet-driven, networked world, we're moving away from the idea of finding one single answer that's going to work for everybody. That would be when I was growing up, that would be, let's find something, get everybody to agree to that and do that. And in a funny way, that was a very centralized form of thought. But I just want to read you a quote from an interesting piece by a guy named Ethan Miller, who wrote a piece about the solidarity economy. And he describes the process that we're looking for like this. He said, beginning from a core belief that people are deeply creative and capable of developing their own solutions to economic problems, and that these solutions will look different in different places and contexts, a solidarity economy approach seeks to make existing and emerging alternatives visible. See, there's that word, visible, and to link them in mutually supportive ways. And the core idea is simple, continuing, alternatives are everywhere, and our task is to identify them and connect them in ways that build a coherent and powerful social movement for another economy. In this way, solidarity economy is not so much a single model of economic organization as it is a process of economic organizing. It is not a single vision, but an active process of collective visioning. Now this intensifies the responsibility on each of us. It's not about signing up for something that somebody else thought up. It's about you engaging with the problems and imagining what do you want to see and what are you willing to work for. Now, so the three things that are changing: ideas are changing, practices are changing, and places are changing right in our midst. And I'm just going to allude to these, and we can talk about them in greater depth and link it back to divestment. The first thing is that ideas are changing. Now, some of you are aware of this, some of you are not, but there is an increasing flood of wonderful books and articles and ideas coming forward on these questions. Now, you know, when I first was invited to do this panel, I thought, why am I going to come up here? Bill McKibben wrote a great book on local economy, on deep economy, and he's the leader of the divestment movement, I think, in the country. So I'm just going to be coming up and saying, listen to him. At the same time, since Bill's visionary books have come out, there are more and more and more efforts and more projects. So I just want to mention, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with this, there's a wonderful economist at Tufts University named Neva Goodwin. And Neva Goodwin has written new textbooks that address these questions. And one of the issues we're hoping, well, I'll tell you about in a minute, is to ask students to ask their economics departments, why aren't these textbooks being used instead of traditional neoliberal or neoconservative things? She's written a microeconomics and a macroeconomics textbook. They're wonderful. John DeGraff wrote a very accessible book called What's the Economy For Anyway? What is the purpose of an economy? How often do we stop and ask ourselves that? How often do we discuss it? Wouldn't that be interesting if we put it on the Middlebury admissions? Ask every student, what's an economy for? Tim Jackson over in the UK wrote an excellent book called Prosperity Without Growth, raising the question of what prosperity could look like if we weren't addicted to the idea that it meant always everything had to be bigger. The subtitle is Economics for a Finite Planet. Frances Moore LePay wrote a book called Eco-Mind, Changing the Way We Think to Create the World We Want, where she has some very basic questions about the mental models that we use for where we want to go. And David Brancaccio, I think you're going to see his film. So it's not just books, it's also films, Fixing the Future, which shows you, and the important point here, the point that I really want to stress for you, is that the new economy is not something that you have to imagine in the future and have to work incredibly hard because it's so unlikely and it's so distant. No, it is actually coming into being all around us right now. We're just not sufficiently aware of it. We're not drawing strength from each other and from these examples. So ideas are changing. Gus Speth just wrote a wonderful book called America, the Possible, Manifesto for a New Economy. Gar Alperovitz has a book coming out called What Then Must We Do, which is a very concrete and marvelous book. I've had the fortune to read it even before it's been published, on practical steps that we can take. Now, Bill was good enough to start talking about these practices that are changing, and I love the way he phrased it. He talked about things that we, prior to this period, we had become accustomed for economic or other reasons to be centralized. He mentioned energy, food, information, and capital. And what we're seeing right now is that Americans, who are a creative bunch, are right now asking themselves, how can we distribute these things in fundamentally new ways? And so we can go into this. Some of you this may be your area of expertise. I'm aware of several people here who know a good deal more about this than I do. But the food systems, as Bill mentioned, are changing all over the country, moving away from the dominance of the huge oligopolistic firms, which still have enormous power, but where people are experimenting with fundamentally different CSAs and food hubs and farm to table and, as Bill used to phrase him, and steal from him the internet for calories. I think that's great. That's relocalization. Energy we discussed. There are 2,000 public utilities in the United States already that serve 47 million people. They're not driven for shareholders. They're not designed to serve shareholders. They're designed to serve users. 47 million people is about 16% of the population of the U.S. It's bigger than the population of Spain. And the whole idea of having energy be localized and in local control is an incredibly important piece of this puzzle. And we can go on and talk about energy. Businesses are trying to rethink what they do. There are new business organizations like the Business Alliance for Living Local Economies, the American Sustainable Business Council. There are groups that are fundamentally asking, there's the creation of the B Corporation. Some of them, you may know that very well, but it's a corporate form that says we can set up a business that provides goods and services, that provides jobs, that uses capital, but that is not enslaved just to the shareholder, that it can have multiple outcomes legally. And there are all kinds of things. Finance. Now I'm going to leave some of that for John to talk about, but we have a fundamentally corrupt and broken finance system, which is increasingly, the craziness of it almost defies the imagination. You know, we have massive banks that now, not only through their investments and assets that they control, but through the various countervailing swaps they've set up, they have, depending on whether you see these as assets or not, they have assets in the hundreds of trillions of dollars, bigger than the GDP of the world, and making decisions that have nothing to do with the real economy. They are addicted to the casino economy. And John, who had the opportunity to learn about this while working in a very prominent way and for one of these banks, will tell you a little bit more about just how crazy this has gotten and how far we need to move from that. And there are alternatives, public banking alternatives, the whole community development finance system, the 7,600 credit unions that exist in the U.S. There are many, many ways that people are either have already invented or experimenting to get capital back into communities rather than off into the casino economy so that people can do things that people really need. And I could go on. Job creation, there's a particular role of the internet, but it's not just ideas that are changing, it's not just practices that are changing, it's also places that are changing. And I'm very proud to be here in Vermont. Vermont is one of the leadership communities around the country because you're experimenting with so many different things at once. I'm delighted to see my friend Marta Cironi from the Donella Meadows Institute. She's doing an assessment now of just how many different ways organizations in Vermont are pulling together to create a new model of the economy right here. And you're very lucky because not only is there a critical mass of groups that have experimented, you also have a governor who's interested in this, a legislature that's willing to support it. You have a lot of tremendous opportunity. Now, just to wrap up, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing as one organization. The New Economics Institute is gradually morphing into the New Economy Coalition, and we're looking for pathways where different new economy ideas can be introduced. One of those pathways, which we just got going this year, were these kinds of summits, campus discussions on the new economy. There are 14 of them taking place around the country in this month. When we put them out as an RFP saying we would give small grants, we heard from 72 colleges and universities in 24 states saying, we want to talk about this. We could only fund 8 at that time. We boosted it to 14, but I would like your help moving it forward next year. We're hoping to have a summer convergence of student organizers and local community organizers in New York City this year to plan to carry this to the next level and to be asking universities to think about themselves in new ways, whether it's the curriculum they're offering, whether it's the new models that they can present and make students and others aware of, or whether it's the role they play in the local community. We're thinking about pulling together a whole new economy week where wherever you are and whatever you're doing, we just ask that you would take on the role of making yourself visible so that we can all see each other. And then we have plans for 2014. So what I want you to hear is that there is a mix of theory and practice unfolding all over the country simultaneously right now. And I don't think life is ever going to be the same because one of the things right at the heart of the beating heart of it is the climate issue in its urgency And the questions that are being raised on over 230 campuses now is, what is an economy? What is the role of investment? What responsibility do we have? That link, that question of divestment opens the door into the vast area of the economy itself. What you can do, I mean, basically, don't look to other people to do something. This is a flaw that we all have. Boy, if only somebody would do something. That's true. We all wish Congress would do more. We all wish other people would do more. But what I'm asking you is, wherever you are and whatever you do, think about how you can intensify and deepen your commitment, your knowledge, your engagement. There's only one you in your specific place, and that's what's exciting. But people need to take responsibility for that. And so what we are hoping at this point is that the new economy will continue to rise out of our own spaces to create the homes and institutions and communities and states and countries all over the world that we actually want to live in, and that address those practices that I alluded to. And I just want to finish by reading a quote going back to South Africa. This is a quote from Albie Sachs, who is an ANC lawyer, who was attacked by the secret police when he was in Mozambique and nearly killed by a car bomb. When he recovered and South Africa became a democracy, he came back to South Africa, where he became the equivalent of a Supreme Court justice. And this is from his memoir, when he asked himself whether it was all worth it, everything he'd been through. And this is his quote: "We had willed it all, worked for it, never given up, never let go of the basic ideas. Yes, we had believed, belief had been fundamental, but we had backed it up with endless hard work and learned how to do things together and to accommodate the fears and interests of others and to survive the sarcasm and disbelief of those who regarded themselves as more knowledgeable than ourselves about what they called the real world. And we just kept on going on and on until at last the impossible became first feasible, then real, and finally inevitable. I believe that we're entering a key historic period when it's time for us to make the new economy feasible, then real, and finally inevitable." Thank you.
And now we're going to take some questions. So if you'd like a question, I can bring you the mic.
Right, start. Yes, I'm Marta Cerroni, or Cerroni, the Italian way, at the Danella Meadows Institute in Norwich, Vermont. And indeed, to follow up on what Baba just said, we started a listening campaign, meeting with different organizations and understanding what the new economy looks like from the perspective of different networks and organizations and businesses working on new models. What I initially found is that sometimes the new economy definition, like calling it new economy, puts people a little bit off in the sense that, like, oh, what's so new about it? We are already doing it. And so there is, in Vermont, obviously we are at an advantage in that respect. And so one sense that I really feel is that on one end, yes, it's very good to get an idea of what's wrong with the larger system as we analyze it and as we are doing it together here. At the same time, there is the important perspective of the region. So there is no doubt that a lot of the solutions are coming from the region. So what does it look like from the regional perspective? What are they fighting against? What does the system at the macroeconomic level look like at the regional level? And what can be done? And what can be feasible and real and inevitable at the regional level? So that's something that has become very special in these conversations. And I'm happy to talk more about how people can get in touch with us, and we would be really happy to work together on, with this group of people. I don't know if you have any comments.
Anyone else?
little shy. I have a question, Bob. I'm curious, what's the same and what's different about divestment from South Africa versus divestment from the fossil fuel industry, both at a conceptual level and at a practical level?
What's the same is that when South Africa was first raised, people said, what does this have to do with us? It's so far away, it's so big, it's irrelevant. And in a certain sense, people react that way sometimes to the idea of dealing with a whole energy-based economy. It's too big, or it's too far away, or it's, how does it affect me? And it took a process, I'm sad to say, because we don't have much time in this instance, of a number of years for people to be educated and to start to really draw parallels between what was happening in South Africa and our own experience with inequality and race in the United States. And there were certain particular events that drove this. Now that's a parallel that I think we may see here. One of the reasons that I believe Bill and 350 decided to launch the Do the Math tour is because of the disgrace, and I don't think there's any other word for it, the disgrace that we went through an entire presidential campaign without presidential candidates discussing arguably the most serious problem in front of the whole country. And a disgrace, I would say, that extended to the pathetic reporters who refused even to ask them about it. I don't know what process was at work in their brains. But subsequently, events intervened in the form of Hurricane Sandy, where it suddenly was on everybody's mind. And there were parallels with that in South Africa, the death of Stephen Biko, the Soweto riots. And we can count, sadly, we can count on the fact there are going to be other events that are going to draw our attention to the failure of the American economy and our problems around climate. Being able to doing the thinking and the careful work that's happening right now in order to be able to engage more vigorously at those moments of crisis is a lesson that I think we can draw. It may seem that, these things go in waves, and I think right now we have seen now a first pass as the 230 schools are starting to deal with this. But if we have another Hurricane Sandy, there's going to be an intensification of this debate. The students and others who engage with it are going to be even more aware, and they're going to be much less willing to accept the kind of patronizing, go slow answers that they're getting right now. I don't know, Bill, do you want to?
No, I think that's right. I mean, actually, I think that this thing is still cresting, even in its first wave. We're actually at about 260 schools now. And
you should have a ticker.
There is a ticker, but here's why. Here's the thing. I mean, here are the things I think that are going to make it extremely difficult for administrations and trustees in the long run not to do the right thing on this. Okay, one, unlike, and these are things that are different from the apartheid struggle, which was, I got to play a little role in when I was in college and was wonderful. But here are the things that are different. One, we found out about global warming at college and university laboratories and science departments. That's where we learned about it. If those colleges and universities can't bring themselves to do relatively simple things, spend 5 years rejiggering their investment positions so they're not fully implicated in the climate crisis, then nobody else is realistically going to do things on the scale that we need. I said the other day, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, if you can't get colleges to divest their holdings, really it's time to just ask them to stop teaching courses about climate change. Because it's pointless to bum everybody out and then just say there's nothing, but nothing can be done. It's too hard. It's too hard even for us here on the Board of Trustees to, make mild adjustments to our portfolio. Second thing, all these colleges and universities, Middlebury included, have spent the last decade boasting about how green they are, and that's a really good thing. Middlebury's done a huge amount. I see Nan Jenks-J in the back, who's been just the leader in making sure that this place becomes one of the greenest campuses in the country, and now everybody else is trying very hard to do the same thing. But I think that the argument, the sheer logic of the position that the dining hall is no different from the endowment, I mean, they're both parts of the institution, is going to weigh heavily. Third thing, and this is really, I think, crucial, there's no place better than a college campus in this case to make clear the strange and somewhat unique intergenerational ethical problem that we're now moving into. Basically, colleges are places where old people tell young people things, you know, and that's okay. I mean, it sort of basically works all right that way, and we empower you all to, you know, tell us things and so on and so forth. But in this case, you know, Bob and I are going to shuffle off this mortal coil before things are, I don't know, maybe not, but we're going to be, at least we're going to be towards the end of our lives before things are absolutely impossible, you know. They're getting close. I mean, Hurricane Irene was a kind of reminder that we're getting hit harder and harder up here. But you guys, I mean, if you've got 60 years, not 20 years left on this planet, then those lines of rising sea level and rising temperature just run right over your life. And this is a case where young people are going to have to just say to trustees and stuff, look, this is more important to us than it is to you. Listen to us on this. Do something about it. And I think that those three things will probably combine to make it, I mean, to make it a very, I think it's no question that one of the main front lines in the battle against climate change in the last 15 weeks has become American college campuses. It's going to spread internationally in the same way, and it's going to be very, very powerful, interesting fight. Doesn't mean it's going to be an easy fight, and the reason that it's not an easy fight to some degree has to do with who the composition of boards of trustees now is. It's mostly made up of very rich people who in our society, for reasons that Bob outlined, are mostly Wall Street people. And that means that they, you know, are not inclined to look at the kind of morality of and utilitarian meaning of investments. All they're interested in generally is bottom line results. But that's where the interesting fight's going to be, and that's one of the reasons why it leads into a sort of larger fight about what economies look like, what they mean, they are. It's a powerful flashpoint.
I'd like to add one quick thing. In the South Africa debate, the first couple years, year or two, fundamentally the institutions did not believe that the people recommending divestment were serious. They thought this was a momentary flash in the pan, and that if they just waited for the seniors to graduate, everyone else would forget about it. This turned out to be a political miscalculation on their part. And one of the things I want to just mention to you, because it's so hard to believe it when you learn about it, is that the actual law that was passed to apply sanctions against South Africa was passed through Republican leadership in the Senate, overriding a veto by President Reagan, the only veto override led by his own party, and the only veto override of his foreign policy in his presidential career. Now, that was as unthinkable when he became president as it would be unthinkable now for John Boehner or the leaders of the Republican Senate to take the lead on climate. But it changed because of the turbulence that existed on campuses and beyond, because people stopped patronizing and realized this was not going to go away. This was a crisis that had to be addressed. And so they, sadly, from their perspective, were forced to lead. That's where we have to go.
Thank you so much, Bill and Bob. Now I'd like to give just a few minutes for our wonderful student organizers for divestment on Middlebury campus. They only represent a small part of our huge group of people, but there you go, Jeannie and Alexa.
I'm Alexa, class of 15.5. Why do we divest? Speaking of, old people telling things to young people in college, I'll just tell a really quick story. We've interviewed about 20 faculty members now on why they think divestment is important, and I'm happy to report that most faculty members are very supportive. A few aren't, though. And one that I was speaking to said, I think it's great that you guys are involved. I think it's great that you're leaders. But when you're young, you think that the world operates mostly in black and white, and as you get older, you realize that the world operates mostly in a gray zone. To which I said, yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's nothing gray about the fossil fuel industry's business model. And as a leader of the environmental movement, as a leader of the global community, there should be nothing gray about Middlebury's response. We outlined very specifically in our mission statement that we're a leader on environmental issues, we're a leader of the global community, and that we stretch beyond the Green Mountains to actually taking action in the world. And, you know, we can't say we are something on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and not be that thing on Thursday and Friday. It's our job as students to hold Middlebury to what we say we are until we slip way below, you know, what we say we are till we're nothing but sort of just dialogue. It's our job because we're not going to self-regulate. We can't rely on the administration for that. And the way I see it, divestment is our generation's rebellion against that gray area business, gray area theory. You know, we can't, if a slow and gradual process of 2 centuries was what got us into this problem of, you know, blindly following a market that encouraged overconsumption and environmental degradation, a slow and gradual process that also blindly follows the market until it's economically favorable, is not what it's going to get us out of it. You know, we have to build the economy that works for us in the long run and build something that works off of our values. And the way I see it, divestment is the very start of that.
So well put, and thank you, Asi, for organizing this, and Bill and Mr. Massie for coming and speaking today. I thought what you said was really terrific, and I look forward to the rest of the events. I just want to quickly outline what we're asking for here at Middlebury, and what the timeline is, and why we're asking for that. A little less than a month ago, 7 of the many students working on divestment here at Middlebury presented to the Board of Trustees, and what we asked for them at that point was that by March 15th, they make a public commitment that Middlebury wants to divest and is going to try to divest and is going to divest, but they just don't know how yet, maybe, because there's a lot of financial and logistical things that are making it harder for them to make a real decision that comes with strategy by that early deadline. And so we said March 15th, just make a commitment and make it public so we can celebrate and show other schools that this is possible. And so if by March 15th we can get a commitment from Middlebury, that means that the rest of the spring we can take that momentum to other schools across the country, and other schools will have that little nugget to tell their administrations that they can make a similar decision. Another reason why March 15th is an important date is just that this is obviously an urgent issue, and so we need to take action on it as fast as we can. Waiting until May just doesn't address this issue as fast as it needs to be addressed. And so just a couple of days ago, on March 4th, we marched forth for divestment here at Middlebury and at schools across the country. We have a terrific video of it up on YouTube, and we also have a display in the atrium of the Davis Family Library here at Middlebury that I hope you'll go check out. It has a lot of the rationale for why divestment and what it needs to look like at Middlebury, a couple of posters on the impacts that we're trying to have through divestment, and also computer with a reel of a number of relevant videos, one of them by Bill. So I hope you'll check that out. Wear an orange square if you can find one. I'm not sure how I can get them to you right now, but I'll find a way. And down at the library as well, we'll have squares of orange construction paper, and you can write something about why divestment makes sense to you or anything else you feel about it, and put it up on the bulletin board there. And that will be a great way to publicly show your support, and they may eventually get delivered to the administration. The other thing that we would love to ask you to do is just to write to our administrators, or if you know any trustees, I can't give you their email addresses, but I can give you our president's and our treasurer's email addresses. We'd love for you to write to them and just encourage them to make a public statement possible by March 15th. So thanks all for your help and for this awesome conference today.
Thank you so much, Jeannie and Alexa. And thank you again so much, Bob and Bill, both for coming here today and sharing a bit of your wisdom with us. I would like to invite you all for the rest of today's events. The next event will happen at 4 p.m. In By Hall 2619, and there is a schedule actually on the wall just behind here, and there are schedules all around. And if you would like a little handy small schedule with you as well, just ask me. I have a few of them with me. See you later today, and thank you so much for coming. And let's give another hand for Oh no, it's 3:30. I'm sorry, it's at 3:30.